episode, we're going to walk through the 7 dimensions of applied behavior analysis. Now, this is an incredibly important concept for practicing BCBAs as well as those doing research. You may have gone through these dimensions in grad school and focused more academically on scholarly articles or other literature and how to determine whether or not those particular studies were embedded into each of these dimensions. Today, we're going to walk through how to take each of these 7 dimensions and apply those in your daily practice, and to do so with grace and with compassion as you are practicing as a BCBA with integrity. Now, before we dive into the 7 dimensions, let's go back to the beginning and where they came from. In 1968, Bear, Wolf, and Risley wrote their seminal article entitled Some Dimensions of Applied Behavior Analysis, where they outlined each of these 7 dimensions, providing us with definitions and examples of what those dimensions are and laying the foundation for our ever-growing field. In 1987, they came back with a secondary article putting the emphasis back on each of these dimensions and entitling this work Some Still Current Dimensions of Applied Behavior Analysis. Now, in 2025, we are looking at those same 7 dimensions of behavior analysis as the foundation and the footwork for everything that we do, both in research and in practice. Okay, now we've talked a little bit about the history of where the dimensions come from. Let's dive into the dimensions themselves. So, as you may have guessed, the first 3 dimensions are applied, behavioral, and analytical, ABA. But then we move into the remaining 4, and we get conceptually systematic, technological, effective, and generality. Now, it may seem like this is a lot to remember, but there are some great mnemonic devices out there, particularly one that ABA Technologies has a great visual for, and I will link it as well. But it is Get a Cab. So you're going to remember it from that mnemonic device. And then when we walk through them in practice, we go a little bit out of order on that. But again, this graphic is really great at being able to demonstrate what that looks like. Now that we know our 7 dimensions, let's walk through each one, and we're going to go through the definition and an example of each one. The term applied indicates that the variable of interest is more important to an individual or to a society compared to a theory or a group of theories. So here is where we're really talking about social significance in the applied field. When we're selecting goals, we want to make sure that they are socially significant behaviors. We want to make sure that goals actually change the quality of life for the individual that we are working with. The term behavioral indicates that a study is analyzing physical events and that the individual whose actions changed can be identified. So here what we're looking at is behavior as subject matter, and we're looking for it to be both observable and measurable. And so this is when our operational definitions really come into play. And we want to make sure that we're measuring something concrete like engagement compared to something a little bit more vague like motivation. The term analytic indicates that a study has demonstrated control over the target behavior. In essence, a functional relationship exists. So here we want to remember to make data-based decisions. We want to ensure that every choice that we are making with intervention and what step to go forward with is one that is based upon the data that we have collected. We want to ensure that we are doing function-based interventions and not just using cookie-cutter interventions that might be easy or preferred. The phrase conceptually systematic indicates that a study has related all interventions and procedures back to the principles from which they were derived. We want to ensure that those derived principles are rooted in behavior analysis and that we're not using eclectic practices. We want to ensure that we are explaining interventions in terms of the principles from which they were derived, such as reinforcement or extinction, rather than just using a bag of tricks or indicating, because it worked. The term technological indicates that a study has listed all components of the intervention as well as having fully described each of those components. So the point of this particular dimension is that we want it to be clearly defined and replicable. We want to make sure that our interventions are being described in such a way that someone can pick that up and run that intervention. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding being too vague or too jargon heavy for someone to be able to run the intervention appropriately and correctly. The term effective indicates that a study has altered a target behavior to a significant degree such that that change is socially important. Here we want to remember social validity again. It's great if we can decrease a targeted behavior for a reduction, but if it is not socially significant in decreasing it, then it's not as meaningful. We want to make sure that everything that we do has that social validity piece, and that while it may be effective, that determining factor is the significant change and that social validity component. We want to ensure that that individual is able to perform that skill independently and individually out in the natural environment and not just meet mastery trials within a clinical setting. The term generality indicates that a study's behavior change is seen across an extended period of time, across settings, and among other relevant behaviors. This is where we want to ensure that those skills are maintained and generalized across settings and into the natural environment. One such example is hand washing.